Wow, that's so how does this, because obviously what people like myself would probably see from you is you obviously have these disabilities. This is around 2016 time. You now have dystonia, and you've always had your cerebral palsy. Unfortunately, you've been dealt this tough hand, but you're showing great adversity, and you're showing that it's not a limitation, because you're taking medals home for fun at competitions, and you're still active on social media. You're still doing all these things. You're okay. I have to do things differently to able-bodied people, but I'm still doing them. There's nothing stopping me here. How does this affect personal life? Like, for example, do you require? I'm trying to really word this in a way that shows the respect it demands. So if I say anything that's out of turn, please like don't take it offensively. I'm not trying to cause offense, but it's like, do you require additional care in certain aspects of your life still, even though you have all these what people would consider athletic achievements, and you have these minor, like you say, the great example is like people are saying your physical disabilities aren't as visual as physical amputees or things like that, or short stature.
So to start with, no. Up until I think it was about 2017, where it was like the end of 2016, start of 2017, where it got to the point where it was really bad.
Okay.
And that's actually at that point I had to stop swimming. I had to withdraw from Rio a week before I was supposed to fly out.
Mm-hmm.
I lost my funding. I lost my place at the National Centre, and I was I had constant nerve pain from shoulder issues. I couldn't lift either arm above shoulder height. I had very little use of my legs. My core was really weak. I basically had lost a lot of my function, and I
And
had
this has
to
just been caused
relearn.
by a compound of the dystonia and the
Yeah, just
cerebral
a
palsy.
massive progression of Estonia.
Mm-hmm.
We had a coach who wasn't very nice, treated us extremely badly, who eventually was fired for basically a lot of us reported him for basically abuse, and
Okay.
he was fired for that. From that, I have PTSD. So, like all of this stressful stuff, like with dystonia, stress can make it a lot worse and trigger it to get worse a lot quicker. I'd had a few falls and I fell onto my shoulder, and again, trauma. Like some people develop dystonia from having a spinal injury, being in a car crash. Like sometimes trauma can cause it to react. And
Okay.
for me, the stress and then falling onto my shoulder and getting a soft tissue injury is what caused the dystonia to move to my shoulders. Um, so I then had to basically relearn. I wasn't even thinking about sport at that point. I had to relearn how to move, like how to get dressed, how to basically function, how to get myself to uni, like how to be able to sit through a lecture without crying in pain. Um, it was rough. Like it was a really rough time. It was really hard to deal with. Going from a part-time wheelchair user to a full-time wheelchair user, not even be able to walk around a Tesco Express anymore. Like that was kind of the most annoying thing, is those little things
Mm-hmm.
that I could still do that was easy. Like I could run into Tesco Express and get a loaf of bread. But now I have to get my chair out, and it takes so much longer. It takes so much more effort. Um, and that was kind of the biggest thing at that point. I wasn't really thinking, oh, I'm not going to swim again. It was more of
Mm-hmm.
like, what am I going to do with my life? Like I kind of fully identified as an athlete, and I was like, well, who am I now if I can't swim? But I did have carers before, but I didn't need them for as many things. So like if I decided to walk around a shop, I had to get someone to hold like I was on crutches, couldn't walk without crutches, so had to get someone to obviously like push the shopping or have a
Mm-hmm.
basket. Um, and I was quite stubborn at that point. I didn't want to use my chair every time I went to a supermarket unless I obviously needed to, unless I was really tired. And I had like help for folding, washing, and just general stuff, but I could still cook myself quite easily. Like there were things that I didn't need help with. Um, so it was only really like once or twice a week for a couple of hours, and then it came to the point where I needed help pretty much every day to do a lot of stuff. And like things you wouldn't think about, like even where I live now, the bin storage is outside, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lock pad. So like for me, having to press buttons and then turn something really quickly is really difficult, because it's the not only you've got to plan how you're going to do it. I can't go from pressing a button to turning the little turny thing quick enough for the door to
Okay.
actually open. And the fact as well, it was obviously really high up, and the bins are really high because they're like the industrial ones, not
Like
like a
the
normal. Um, so even things like that are like really challenging that I'd have never thought about when I could walk, and I think
Mm-hmm.
other people wouldn't necessarily think of. But yeah, so I kind of just really like I was lucky that I still had uni, that I'd already started uni in Manchester. Kind of threw myself into that. Had to move out of the swimming flat because I was in a British swimming flat. moved into halls, which was a horrendous experience. Um, and it's just like so loud there. And when you struggle to sleep anyway from pain, and then you've got students up all hours of the night, like
Yeah.
just don't sleep, like it just doesn't help. Um, and then I think as well, like that was kind of the most eye-opening thing for me is that I was in denial a lot that I was struggling with depression, and I just didn't want to accept it. And then when I moved into halls, there were 7 of us in halls, and 5 out of 7 of us were on antidepressants, and that
Wow.
was like made me realize, well, actually, this is quite a normal thing for people my age, and most people haven't really been through all this stuff. So that kind of made me feel a bit better about it. However, having 5 people on antidepressants probably wasn't the best planning of putting them all in the same flat
Yeah,
because
that's.
they would just sit there drinking alcohol, which wasn't exactly the best thing to do.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
So yeah, don't if you're struggling with mental health, don't just sit and drink alcohol. It literally just makes things worse. It does not help. um,
Yeah, I agree with that statement.
so yeah, I soon pulled myself out of that, and I just don't drink anymore because now I just I don't really care for it anymore. But I kind of like realized quickly that I need to stop because it's not helping. Like there's no reason that I'm doing it. I'm just doing it just to kill time, basically.
Mhm.
And yeah, so after about a year, my mum was like, well, my mum had started a masters swim club in Birmingham, and I was still like pretty much heading home every weekend because my carers were in like midweek, so I would
Mhm.
generally drive home to Birmingham every weekend just so my mum could look after me, basically. Um, and the one of my old swimming coaches had made a master squad, and a lot of the swimmers in it were parents of kids I used to swim with, and like my mum had started swimming with them, and she was like, "Well, why didn't you come along?" And at that point, I was kind of like, "Well, I'd rather never try to swim again and like not know, rather than get
Mhm.
in and realize I can't swim," because I was like, I'd just be devastated all over again if I can't swim. But somehow she just knew that I'd figure out a way. Like she didn't think I'd ever get back into swimming again, but she just wanted me to know, like if I went on holiday and I wanted to like float in the pool or go in the beach, like on in the sea on the beach, she wanted me to know that I could do it,
Yeah.
and she didn't want me to like miss out and feel like I couldn't. And even like if you go for like family swim, you're just floating around. She just wanted me to know that I could. And
It comes back to like you said at the start, and it's like you don't feel like you're in that different category. Like even if you're just in the water,
yeah,
you still feel like you're there.
but I think at this point as well, it was I didn't know how people were going to react. I didn't know how to react to people that knew me before. I didn't know how they were going to react to me. I just didn't
Mhm.
really know what to do. I didn't know whether I need to explain myself. I didn't know whether I don't say anything. Like, do I just not look at them? Do I avoid them? Do I never speak to anyone again that I knew before? It was kind of like I just overthought everything, and I was just like, I don't know what to do. Um, but I was really lucky that my mum eventually convinced me to go, and I started in the learn to swim lane. So we
Mhm.
had a coaching that was like literally figuring out what I could do, what I couldn't do, and getting me back into it. And within a year, I'd gone up. So it was a 4-lane pool. I'd started and learned to swim, and within a year, I was in the quickest lane, beating everyone.
How was that? That's an incredible story in itself. Just even if you completely like just take that one aspect of I went from learn to swim lane to the fastest in a year. Again, that's incredible on its own. But how was those learn to swim lesson days when you're thinking I've got medals in this and I'm having to literally teach myself how to do the basics of this again? How was that
I hated it.
like emotionally?
Yeah, I was embarrassed. Like, absolutely hated it. Like, everyone knew me as a world
Mhm.
champion. They expected me to go to Rio and come at home with at least 3 gold medals. And I didn't go. I felt like a failure. I felt like I let everyone down. And I was also really embarrassed. Like, the fact that I know people were obviously worried about me and like worried about what had happened and stuff, and people don't mean to stare, but it's also like everywhere you go where people know you, they're like, "Oh God, what's happened to you?" And it's just like, "Ugh, do I
Yeah.
really have to explain it again?" Like it was just,
And that I suppose you have to do it like you don't just like you can't just do it once. You have to
yeah.
every time you see somebody, you have to almost relive it, which is tough.
I think because I knew these people, one way it was harder because they knew what I was like before, but in the other
Mhm.
way it was easier because I felt like I could trust them. And like within a couple of sessions, I did feel much better. But I just kind of thought like, um, wasn't really thinking about race internationally, but I was just kind of thinking like, this was the one thing that I thought I was going to do forever. Like when I retire, I was always going to keep swimming because it's always been my thing. And I used to spend 28 to 30 hours a week training. So even when I was getting back in, I was doing like maximum an hour a week, and I still had
Mhm.
all these hours where I was just like, I don't know what to do with myself. And obviously, like I put loads of weight on because when you're training like 70k a week, you can eat whatever you want. Well,
Yeah,
obviously,
you're just
health
burning
is
calories,
you
aren't you?
eat
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Like you literally, like I think I was having like 5 meals a day at one point, and I had loads of snacks because I needed it because I was training a ridiculous amount. And when you stop all exercise, and then also you can't walk anymore, you're in a wheelchair like
Mhm.
full time, you just
Well,
don't
what is
burn
this like?
any calories.
Because swimming, it's the 1-to-1 rest to work ratio, isn't it? Because there's no
Mm,
impact. So yeah,
yeah.
you're churning out kilometers.
Yeah, so I used to do like nine 2-hour sessions a week in the pool, sometimes 10, and then like a good few hours, in like two hours twice a week in the gym, sometimes 3. So it was a lot of work, and yeah, so going from that to starting again. But so after I kind of got to the point where I could swim and I could fit into kind of a club environment, I decided because I was still at Manchester Met, they honoured my sports scholarship, so they pay for your City of Manchester swim fees. So it meant obviously I
That's,
didn't have any
that's that's good of
funding.
them to honour that, though. I think
Yeah,
that's yeah.
so they pay for your fees and your training sessions. So I literally all I had to pay for was my ASA swim membership, so that I could actually be like a registered member of the club.
Mhm.
And obviously it was a massive weight lifted off. I didn't have to pay for S&C. I got one-on-one S&C, and at first I was nervous starting with a new coach that hadn't worked with swimmers, hadn't worked with disabled people. Honestly, one of the best S&C coaches I've ever had. It was like he reached out to people who worked with para athletes. He reached out to like British swimming, like because they had MMU sport had a connection with British para swimming, obviously being in Manchester, and like did research online and was just really open to asking me. And there was another athlete, Hannah Dines, who actually got me into athletics, who's a paracyclist, went to Rio, and he worked with both of them.
Was she the
And
one
he
on
was,
your story the other day? I think I saw you two. What was that?
no, that was another athlete. But Hannah did actually get me into a frame running. But she's a lovely girl, honestly, really really kind, and he was just amazing with us. Like he sat us down, like we went through what we can and can't do, and just kind of both we all learned together. And he was just honestly amazing. And I got physio support, so stuff that I wouldn't have been able to afford because I wasn't on funding anymore. I just got, and that made such a big difference. And I started training with City Manchester with Matt Walker, who actually was a teammate of mine years ago. He has ataxic CP, so it's kind of like a shaky type of CP. And he was an S7 swimmer, like world Paralympic European champion. So obviously a great person to have as your coach. And it took him a while because he'd known me as an S9 swimmer. It did take quite a long time for him to realise my limitations, like my new limitations, and
Yeah.
because he was trying to get me to do leg kick, and I literally would just be laying there, and I now have no use of my legs in the pool. So like unless my legs are touching something like the wall, I can't feel them. I don't know where they are, and I can't move them. So I'm quite lucky that I still get a bit of push off of the wall after a tumble turn when my feet touch the wall. But apart from that, I can't use them. I don't know where they are.
Okay.
So like he was trying to get me to do leg kick, and I was literally just floating there for like 5 minutes, not moving. And I looked around and I was like, Matt, can I stop now? Like I'm not gonna move. And eventually he realised that yeah, actually this isn't doing anything.
Bless him. He must have felt quite guilty when he was. He's like, oh,
Yeah,
I've asked the girl that can't feel her
well,
feet to kick.
yeah. And then once he realised like, and because I still struggled a lot with nerve pain and shoulder pain, there were some times I was just in too much pain and I just needed a break. So we started doing like a mushroom float. So basically, you grab your arms, tuck up to your knees, put your head under, like tuck your head under like you're a little mushroom, and you just float. And it used to petrify the lifeguards because I can hold my breath for quite a long time. And I used to like sometimes he'd tap me on the head like you're still breathing.
It's,
Um,
you
but
know it's a long time if your coach has to pull your head out and go, you are still
yeah.
alive, right?
But like it was just like a really good reset. Like I was in loads of pain, so I just
Yeah.
literally go into my little mushroom float in my own little world underwater, which has obviously always been my happy place. And it would just kind of reset. And if it didn't work, I'd get out. If it did work, then I could carry on. And then if I struggled again, I'd just do it again for a few
Wow.
minutes, and then I'd carry on again. And it just worked really well. And then I ended up going to trial. So that was when I was reclassified again to an S5, and that was kind of
Which
a
is where
shock
you're
to me.
still at to this day. You're still at the S5
Yeah.
to this day. Yeah.
So that kind of shocked me because I knew that I was a lot more disabled than I was. But actually having it written down in paper and going, like, it's kind of unheard of to drop 4 classifications in swimming or in any sport, and to go from a 9 to a 5. Unfortunately, there are people that cheat in swim. Not just, I think in para sport, it's not as much drug cheats, it's classification, it's intentional misrepresentation, unfortunately, a big issue. So when someone like me drops classification, like drops from an S9 to an S5, straight away,
It gets a lot of attention. Yeah.
yeah, there's athletes that I knew for years that ignored me because they thought I was cheating. Like some of them ignored me for years until they realised. So I lost a lot of friendships. I honestly didn't really know how to approach it and how to approach people, and I didn't feel like I should have to justify the fact that I've got a progressive condition.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
There's a magazine, an American magazine, absolutely hate. I think it's terrible, called Swim Swam, online,
Right.
and they write articles about all like swimmers, able-bodied and para, in a way, and they have a comment section that's unmanned. So they write it in a way
Because
that's
that's
going to
always safe
play
on
off
social
against
media.
people. So it
Yeah.
like they do it in a way that's going to make you react. So they don't write all the facts. They do it in a way that makes people angry. So they're going to write. So it wasn't just me that got classified that time. There were other athletes. So it wasn't just aimed at me. But there were so many comments saying, "Oh, she's cheating." Oh, like, "Oh, how can she be an S5? She doesn't have muscle wastage." Well, if you knew what dystonia was, that my muscles were always switched on, you would know why I don't have loads of muscle wastage. Like, if you knew that I had a progressive condition, you would know that I am actually more disabled now. Like, if you watched the live stream of me swimming, you would see how much I struggle. And they were saying things like, "Oh, she's going to break all the world records straight away," and all this stuff. It took me 3 years to break the world records. Like, it wasn't straight away.
Yeah.
And it was just that thing that I felt like everyone was staring at me thinking I was a cheat. And I'm not a cheat. Like, I wasn't cheating. But it's so hard when it happens so frequently. It's so hard to prove that you're not a cheat because people assume you are. But I ended up getting reclassified, and then at that meet, I surprised everyone, and I qualified for Europeans in 2018. And that was kind of like, oh, okay, this is weird. I didn't really know how I felt about it. I didn't really want to be around British women at that point because, like, the coach had been sacked. A lot of the staff had changed, but I was still worried that it was going to be
It was
similar.
still associated. Yeah, you still had that association with it.
Yeah. And obviously with the PTSD, again, I was in denial about it at that time. And I was like, oh, I'm fine. Like, because to start with, I would panic every time I drove towards Manchester. Every time I got into Manchester, I'd panic. And then it got to the point where I kind of got numb to it and I wasn't happy about being in Manchester, but I could drive into Manchester without any symptoms. And then the first time I went to the pool, I had a panic attack. But then it got to the point where it was fine. But with City of Manchester, we swam upstairs in the main level pool. British swimming's underground. So it's completely enclosed, like you can't see it. And when I made the Europeans team, I had to go train downstairs for a week as like kind of like we had like a mini holding camp thing to get everyone that was going to be on Europeans team together. And that was like I really struggled, like going downstairs again. Obviously the same, like looked exactly the same. Like there were some people that were similar, like the same people, mostly were new, but I just couldn't cope with it. Like it was really difficult to cope with, and that was kind of the first time I realised and actually accepted that I had PTSD.
Right.
And yeah, that was really difficult. So I went to Europeans. Unfortunately, I had to get reclassified again because dropping so many classifications meant that they wanted to make sure that I wasn't a cheat. So I was reclassified at
Especially, I assume all the noise doesn't help at that time as well, because
no.
once you get reclassified and then everybody else starts going, they're cheating. I suppose they almost have to do it again to sort of prove
Oh yeah,
themselves as well that
definitely.
they've not done it
And
wrong.
obviously, like I was really nervous about going to Europeans and
Yeah.
seeing people that I hadn't seen since 2015, and I'm thinking that I'm a cheat. Like I was like, I don't know how to react. Like, what if someone else has a go at me? Like, I was just like, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, what if people call me cheat? Like, what if, like, I don't know. Like, it was going around in my head. Like, I don't know what to expect. I don't know what to do. And unfortunately, the classifiers that I got at Europeans didn't know what dystonia was, didn't know how to test for it, didn't know how. Basically, for me, the more I try and move, the more dystonic I get. So the more I think about movement, the harder it is for me to move, and the worse my movement is. So when I'm swimming really slowly, I'm less dystonic than when I'm swimming at high speeds.
Okay.
So in the water test, if you get me to only swim at low speeds, I don't look that dystonic. If you get me to swim at race pace, I'm way worse. My control's a lot worse. But at that point, I hadn't really clicked in my mind that I should ask them to do quicker stuff. So we did threshold, which is like 50 beats below max.
Okay.
But threshold isn't really enough to show the full extent of my dystonia when I'm racing, because obviously this is all about racing, not about training for classification. And then because we had so many S6 swimmers, there's only 3 that can swim at a time for one country. So I was put up to a 6, and it was really annoying. I was put 1 mark into an S6 category, and they'd done things like they said I had movement in my left ankle, which I've got proof that I have no movement from my medical evidence. So we were able to appeal on that grounds, but we didn't actually end up having to appeal because when they watched me race, they picked it up straight away and brought me back into reclassification.
Yeah.
The issue was that my main race was on day 1, the 200 freestyle, and because you have to be watched in competition and they have to see you in a freestyle event, but there were 4 other S6s and they were all quicker than me. So GB weren't gonna pull out another S6 so that I could swim to try and get reclassified back down to an S5.
Yeah.
So I literally had to wait until day 5 to race. They saw me, picked me up straight away, and then I went that like afternoon. They put me into another water test, and they literally made me swim about 2,000 meters of max swim. Like exhausted me just to see what happens when I swim at max for a long time.
And obviously, you're European champs right now, so you're trying to save as much energy as possible.
And this is day 5, and my 53, the S5 53 star was a final only. So I did all this stuff. They put me back down to an S5, and the same day, within a few hours, I had to then race the 53 star final.
Jeez.
And obviously, I was emotionally drained. I was exhausted. I was feeling pretty defeated by being put up to an S6. And I raced, and it wasn't a great time for me. I came 3rd. So the next day, I got in, and it was the 100 freestyle S5. And my first 50, bearing in mind this is to feet, not to hand, so to feet should be slower, was 2.5 seconds quicker than what I did the day before, and it would have won gold by over a second. But it was like I was so emotionally drained and stressed and fatigued. So it wasn't a great experience for me, but I was like, you know what? At least I'm through it now.
The thing that amazes me, and I don't know if you pick it up, and I think the listeners probably pick it up because they're a lot more like me than you in the fact that we're not superhuman. You're like, I'm disappointed I got 3rd in a final. That's a medal. And you're like,
But I knew that I could win. That was the thing. Like when you know that you're quick enough to win and something goes wrong, but you're always going to beat yourself up for it and always going to be like, oh, I should have won that.
But that is that mentality that I think really separates people from the elite. Because like this is 2018. In 2016, you've committed to never swimming again, and like you said, you've just accepted it and moved into halls, and you're like, okay, I'm now going to be Tully Kearney without swimming. And then in 2 years, you've gone, actually, sack that. I am an incredible person, and I love swimming. I want to be the best swimmer. I want people to know me as the best swimmer. And you're back on a European Championship podium within 2 years. That's
thank you for listening to this Clips episode on YouTube. And then if you want to hear the whole podcast, you can find them on Apple or Spotify, as well as the full video version on this YouTube channel alongside all the other great content we produce on a weekly basis. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you again on another Clips episode or in the full episode podcast. Tweet us, tag us, let us know what you thought. All the links are down in the description. It means the world that you guys come and support us, so thank you very much.